the Facebook scandal, the March for Our Lives, and Vladimir Putin. I'm Donna Davis, and this is The Square Circle.
If you have a passion for helping people, want to launch a new charity, or need to raise funds, Voluntary Solutions can help. You have a passion for helping people. We have a passion for helping you. Visit voluntarysolutionsdc.com, 844-739-5488.
Hello, and welcome to The Square Circle. I'm your host, Donna Davis. Joining us today are conservative activist Wes Fisher, political reporter James Rosen, and Kelley Vlahos of the American Conservative. Welcome, everyone. Tech giant Facebook is in damage control mode after a scandal involving an analytics firm connected to the Trump campaign. Here's the story from CBS News.
Undercover video broadcast today by Britain's Channel 4 reveals Cambridge Analytica CEO Alexander Nix boasting of his company's involvement in the 2016 presidential campaign. Today, Cambridge Analytica suspended Nix, but Facebook could be in deeper trouble. In 2011, they signed a consent decree with the Federal Trade Commission promising not to allow unauthorized use of users' profile data. Nix's admission suggests Facebook may have violated that agreement.
Kelley, is this really a surprise to any of us for Zuckerberg and Facebook to be embroiled in an analytics issue?
Wow. I feel like Claude Rains in that famous movie. I'm shocked. I'm shocked that people would be working for political campaigns that would buy harvested personal data to win elections. That's exactly what's happened here. Cambridge Analytica was able to harvest personal information that was open sourced on Facebook. That's how Facebook runs. They have been able to dominate the social media field because they've harvested all of our personal information and they're able to sell it to advertisers. That is the engine that keeps Facebook running. And so these companies go in, they're able to buy and sell our personal information, and they're selling them to campaigns, and campaigns are using them to target us with messages and networking capabilities. They were doing this during the Obama administration, his campaigns. Back then, they were giving him all sorts of kudos for networking and building communities. Now this is a more sophisticated way. Did they break the rules? Yes, they did break the rules. There were some rules in place. Cambridge Analytica broke those rules. It's being investigated now, but are we surprised? No, this is what Facebook does, and this is what political campaigns do.
Wes, don't you think, though, that this is really a breach of trust, that they sort of assume we're okay with taking our information because they're helping us connect with families and friends, and so it becomes just not big brother but little brother. Don't you think this is a big breach of our trust?
Absolutely. I think you should be very cautious of anything you put on the internet, especially a social media network that is a multi-billion-dollar company that's free for you to use. That kind of should trigger an alarm that if you're not the client, you're the product. And it's definitely something that you need to be concerned about when sharing personal information online.
I remember when America Online did this so many years ago, and everybody was just up in arms and saying, look, they're taking our information, and there just seemed to be an implicit promise. Are you surprised by this at all, or do you feel like, no, it's just what we should have expected all along?
I'm not surprised, but I think the difference, I agree with what's been said, but I think the data mining is what it's called. It's been around in elections and politics for decades, but it used to come from phone books. It used to come from mailing lists. I think the difference is one of scale. There are, 1 billion, 2 billion Facebook users around the world. Those kind of numbers and that kind of data has not been seen before. I also think that Facebook digs deeper into our personal lives. I mean, people post risque videos. They say things they shouldn't. And so I think that for those two reasons, I think it's more problematic. I also think that Mark Zuckerberg, of course, the founder of Facebook, since the beginning has portrayed himself who's really into transparency. That's what Facebook is about, when in fact he's operated it very secretly. And even now when he's coming forth and he's saying, we're going to change things, we're sorry, I think there's a sense that he's still not revealing the entire extent of the mining.
I agree. I'd like to remind our viewers that you can submit your questions to our guests through our website, www.publicsquare.net, or via Facebook or Twitter, and we'll answer as many as we can live on air toward the end of the show. I do want to point out that Zuckerberg was interviewed today, and he acted...
Is that the Cooper Anderson?
The Facebook.
Anderson
On
Cooper.
Facebook. He continued to act as if he was so shocked and so surprised and he had absolutely no knowledge of any of this. I find that hard to believe.
Well, maybe I heard a different interview, but he was interviewed by Anderson Cooper last night. It aired last night, I believe, and he didn't say that. He acknowledged that in late 2015 they became aware of this problem and supposedly took steps to counter it, but now he's saying we obviously didn't do enough. So, and the criticism is that he became aware of the problem in late 2015, but didn't let any of the Facebook users know. That's the criticism he's now facing. I actually think Facebook is in trouble. They're one of the biggest companies in the world. I don't know if they're going to cease to exist, but I think this is a real hit to their reputation and to their image, especially among young people. My son is 25. He had already told me even before this that people his age were migrating from Facebook to Instagram, for instance. I think this is a really big hit for Facebook, and I think Zuckerberg's going to have to do more than he's said he's going to do so far.
Wes, I would think that there'd be technology out there. If there's technology that can mine all this data, there should be technology to protect us from using the data. Am I totally off base?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. Facebook has kind of admitted to doing all sorts of different things, like they did an experiment to see if they could affect people's mood. And I think really the only way to protect yourself from this kind of thing is to not make yourself available on these platforms, or if you are on these platforms, take steps to make sure you're really not oversharing the amount of things you use. It's also worth noting that the data that Cambridge Analytica got through Facebook could have been purchased legally and is purchased legally every day by tons of market research firms that know everything about your purchasing habits and all that type of detail. So it's really not something you can get away from if you don't want people knowing about you, because there's all sorts of information out there.
Well, that's true, but would that mean that you're saying that Facebook doesn't have unusually deep information about us because of how we share?
No, they certainly do, and that would be, I think the only way around that would be to look at what you're posting online and how you're interacting with people, because I don't see personally a way around once you put something on the internet. I think it's out there for everyone to see and for people to collect and mine, and I don't see any way around that.
There are, just jump in very quickly. I mean, there are settings on Facebook. If you go to like advanced settings, you check a bunch of boxes and stuff, and you can supposedly opt out of a lot of these things, a lot of the sharing. Facial recognition, for instance, you can opt out of facial recognition, which they do. If you don't, they will share your image even if you're not tagged. It used to be you had to be tagged. Now they'll just share your image. But you can go through methodically, but it's fairly complex. And now I think there's some mistrust as to whether opting out actually opts you out.
This coming weekend, the D.C. area is expecting hundreds of thousands of students for the March for Our Lives, which hopes to implement new gun control measures in the wake of the recent Parkland shooting. Wes, do you think that this can actually make a difference?
Well, I think it very well could. It's a very interesting situation to be in, and this is such a horrific thing that happened, and I'm not too much older than someone who is in high school now. I'm 23 years old, and I grew up kind of in this era of every time there is a mass shooting, it is everywhere. But this one does seem a lot different. It has persisted a lot longer than others have in the media, and there definitely has been some steam gathered by gun control activists who want to fundamentally change the way the Second Amendment is interpreted in America. And I think that makes a lot of Americans very nervous that their guns are going to be taken away, so to speak. You see things kind of being portrayed in very dire terms, like how the NRA is a terrorist political organization, which of course isn't true. It's really a membership organization, and their power isn't really from giving politicians $500 and $1,000 checks. It's from the millions of supporters that they have, that if they endorse someone, that person is going to get elected because the people in the district are going to vote for that politician over someone that's not endorsed by the NRA. So that's I think the reality that these marchers need to face, is that they need to win over a lot more hearts and minds before they can kind of affect any sort of change in the country.
It seems like the NRA, has a broadcloth view about gun ownership. I was listening to a congressman who was saying that he had voted against gun controls in the case where there was a wife beating or there was a spousal beating. Kelley, how do you think this hurts or helps the idea that NRA is supporting gun control, broadcloth? There are no parsing of rights.
How it hurts or helps what? The cause for
The cause
gun control?
for gun control.
Well, I have to agree with Wes. I mean, I like just to take this from the perspective, going back for a minute, on whether it'll be helpful or not for this march. I think what we need to look at is whether it'll move the needle on Capitol Hill. And from a practical standpoint, when both the House and Senate are controlled by Republicans, it's going to be very difficult to get gun control on the floor of either of those houses. Maybe bump stocks, there might be a ban on that, might come up. I did once. The NRA was able to lobby against it, and the bill was killed before it came to a vote. I'm thinking, I think in terms of raising awareness about the issue, having 500,000 people marching on the nation's capital is going to be a big deal. It's just whether that will translate into legislation, I am not sure. I agree with Wes. There's a fear in this country that even some legislation on the Hill will lead to more of a ban on guns and a threat to the Second Amendment. I see a lot of support in polls recently, but Americans do want to see some action. But I think the questions that they're being asked, do you want extended background checks? A majority say yes. Do you want armed security guards in the schools? A majority say yes. Do you want to see people who have history of mental illness banned from owning guns? A majority say yes. But those are very broad questions. When we get down to legislation, I think we're going to have a hard time convincing Republicans on Capitol Hill to go for stronger laws. And personally, I'm not sure any of those things, if you do start extending background checks. So what does that mean? We do have background checks now. So there are a lot of myths about how whether there are gaps or holes. But I think the majority of people like to see the existing background checks actually work. And I think that there's been some weakness there. More laws, I'm not sure.
Jeff, to you, how do you feel about the promise of this march and what it could affect?
Well, I think I'm the oldest person on this panel, for good and for bad. And, there was the 1963 Civil March on Washington, at which Martin Luther King Jr. famously spoke, and other powerful speakers. And that led directly to passage a year later, I believe, of the Civil Rights Act. If 500,000 mainly young people really show up, it may not make an immediate difference, but I think there are some concrete things. I think the first thing that might happen is a renewal of the assault weapons ban. Assault weapons were banned for 10 years, from 1994 to 2004. That shows that can be done. There are a couple question marks hanging over this question, which is, number one, do Democrats take control of the House? Most analysts think that that's going to happen. Do they take control of the Senate? Smaller chance of that happening. On the other hand, and also, does Donald Trump remain as president? He's been all over the map on gun control, as he's been on many things. It's hard to know. But it's also important to remember that even when the Democrats controlled Congress completely, both houses in 2007 and 2008, and Barack Obama, that's right, Barack Obama didn't become president. He became president in 2009, and the Democrats still controlled at least one chamber of Congress. And there was just absolutely no movement for gun control, even after the Sandy Hook shootings. I think we might see limited, but on the other hand, these kids are highly motivated. I'm incredibly impressed by how intelligent they are, how articulate they are. And the one thing I would end with is that I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam War protests. And for, mainly kids, they marched, they protested for years, and it didn't look like they were having any impact. But eventually they did. I mean, the protests were a major reason why, in the end, we got out of Vietnam. So I think it's an open question.
All right. And finally, in a surprise to no one, Russian President Vladimir Putin won re-election over the weekend. Here's Conan O'Brien's take.
Vladimir Putin has been re-elected to a fourth term as president of Russia. That was a big surprise, Yeah. The final vote tally was 76% for Putin, 24% shot this morning.
Jeff, I'm throwing this one at you. I have to admit, that was pretty funny.
Well, Conan O'Brien's a tough act to follow. President Trump has gotten a lot of criticism for calling President Putin and congratulating him on his re-election. And I think in some ways that's justified because it was, to use Trump's own language, a rigged election. The strongest opponent of President Putin was basically prevented by President Putin from running. I can't remember if he was imprisoned or charged, but he was prevented from running. And the woman who ran against him, nobody knew. So it was a rigged election. On the other hand, President Trump makes a reasonable point, which is that both President Obama, President George W. Bush talked about, when they took office, they talked about resetting. President Obama famously used the word a reset. They talked about improving relations with Russia. And since September 11th, because the Russians have been warning about jihadism and terrorism even before September 11th of 2001, the attacks, there's been a lot of talk, and now the people act as if Trump is the first president to do this. He's not. The problem is he's under investigation for having, either him or his aides, for having worked with Putin, colluded with Putin in order to get elected. That's the main trouble. But on a broader policy front, I don't think it's as bad as some people are making it.
Wes, what's your thought on it? It would seem to me that his own, the accusations against him that he has a personal relationship with Putin do kind of mar the situation and maybe give him a little tougher of a position.
Absolutely. I think President Trump has very little self-control when it comes to these things. He's very hard to manage up to as a boss, I believe. It was said that they wrote in big letters, "Do not congratulate," and he still congratulated him because that's what he felt like saying. I wouldn't congratulate Putin. I think he's a murderous dictator and a thug and a criminal, and I don't think but I'm not the president, so that's not. I probably wouldn't be in the right saying that if I was president, because that could cause a whole nuclear war. So I'm not sure what to make of it, other than, like James said, it's just a very interesting situation with the Russian investigation. We'll see where that takes us. If Special Counsel Mueller is fired, that will be something that really sets the political world on fire here in the D.C. area.
What do you mean? Why would it be such a setting of the world on fire? He's fired so many people. How could this be so much bigger?
Well, I think the optics of him firing the person that is investigating him it really does kind of make it seem like it makes him look guilty, where in reality, if he just let the investigation play its course, there's probably a pretty good chance, now I don't know anything about this, but there's probably a pretty good chance that it would be cleared up, and maybe some of his associates like Paul Manafort and the other people that have been indicted would be taken down. But I just think letting the investigation play its course and see what it digs up is much better than making it look like you're preemptively firing someone that's going to find something out about you that's bad.
Well, Kelley, he's fired folks who have been investigating him before, so this is kind of nothing new. How do you see this whole situation?
Well, I mean, I'm just going back to the Russian, the Russian call. I mean, I find it very interesting, and I know this is a bit provocative, but I find it very interesting that the Democrats were very hot to reset with Russia when Obama was in office. He took a little flack from Republicans when he would not arm the Ukrainians when in that conflict there. And he was called weak by Senators McCain and Lindsey Graham when he wasn't tougher on Putin. But, in the grander scheme of things, the Democrats really didn't care about Russia. And now they have identified Russia as enemy number one of the United States. I can't help but see this as a majorly politicized issue. I agree with Wes. We have a president who has little self-control, and when he probably saw those big letters saying don't congratulate, he said, well, you know what, I am going to congratulate him. I don't think we should take much from that. I agree there's been lots of questions about the validity of the vote, but there's questions in validity of a lot of votes and foreign elections in which our presidents don't say anything or ignore advisors on the ground that say that there's fraud and abuse. So I agree with Wes. I think we should let this play out. I think he should let it play out and stop firing people. Or he's hiding something. I don't know, and I don't have a crystal ball. But I do feel like this has gotten so politicized that it's really hard to parse out the truth from the politics. And this town is just sizzling right now with all sorts of conspiracy theories and political mayhem. So I guess we'll see.
All right, let's take some questions from our viewers. We have a question from Danielle Rogers. Would the student protesters be taken seriously if they were marching for a conservative cause? Jeff, what do you think?
Would they be taken more seriously if they were marching for a conservative cause? I don't think so, and I'm also a little hesitant to identify gun control as a liberal cause. I mean, Kelley cited some statistics earlier. Overwhelming majorities of Americans support a ban on assault weapons. They support greater background checks. They support more gun controls than we have in place now. So it's clearly not just liberals who support gun control.
Can I throw in on that? I don't think that they would be taken more seriously. I think they probably would be less paid attention to by the media. I think if you had 500,000 people marching against abortion, for example, I'm sure that all the cameras you would do every year, and the cameras barely pay attention.
Not 500,000. No, not 500,000.
Well, we're talking,
not even close.
Right, but I
have to correct that.
I might be being flip here, but I'm thinking they'd probably take it less seriously if it was a conservative march.
All righty, we have another question here from Ernest McKinney. Does the U.S. meddle in other countries' elections? Wes, why don't you take that one?
That's a tough question. I really don't know. I'm not an international election analyst. If I had to guess, in the hundreds of years of U.S.'s existence, certainly could have happened. I mean, I'll kind of pitch the question to James. I don't remember the Bay of Pigs invasion. I don't know if you do, but it seems like that was when we tried to take out an entire foreign dictator. So
we've more than meddled. I mean, Allende in Chile was the democratically elected president in the 70s, I believe. He was a socialist, and there was a CIA orchestrated back plot to overthrow him that actually succeeded. And there are other similar instances. So the United States has a long history of interfering directly in elections.
I can remember some Arab states, Middle East states, and I can remember some South American countries where we see this type of meddling, one could argue, on our part. So,
and of course,
yeah.
Iraq. I mean, we went in there on a pretext, but clearly we wanted Saddam gone.
Kelley, I saw you nodding your head. Do you want to pipe in on this?
Well, I know that there was a study done, and I'm afraid I don't have it in front of me, but there was a study done of, it's like over 100 elections in the last 50 years, and it turned out that the U.S. and Russia / the Soviet Union had meddled in like 3/4 of them. I don't have the statistics, but it was pretty eye-popping that there was equal election meddling on both sides, and it seems it's something that both sides like to do. So, no surprise there.
And during the Cold War, it was more than meddling. The Soviet Union, the United States, actually pretty much ran candidates, almost ran the elections. I mean, there were proxy candidates of the Soviet Union, there were proxy candidates of the United States all over the world. So in a way, what's going on, I'm not defending what Russia did, because we don't like having our elections meddled in, but it's not new.
Okay, and now it's time for the most underreported story of the week. Who'd like to start?
Well, I'll start. There was a really important vote in the Senate this week. There was a vote to pull out our military assistance of Saudi Arabia in their war against the Houthis in Yemen. Senator Sanders, independent, votes with the Democrats. Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat, and Senator Mike Lee, Republican, all got together on this legislation saying that Congress needs to take back its authority on authorizing U.S. military war and hostilities overseas. The vote unfortunately lost, but it was the first time that the Senate actually tried to enforce its authority under the War Powers Act, and at least got the issue of us assisting Saudi Arabia in this war that's left millions of Yemenis starving and dying of cholera as we speak. It's one of the worst humanitarian situations in the world today. So and unfortunately, the mainstream media has failed in its duty to actually cover this, but that's why it's my underreported story of the week.
Wes, how about you?
Mine would be something a little more local to the D.C. area. Everyone has heard about Amazon searching for their next headquarters, and there's been a lot of focus on the D.C. area lately. It was on their final 20 list 3 times in Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, and Maryland. And there's been a couple articles in the recent weeks that saying that Arlington County, where we're sitting right now, is particularly attractive to Amazon for a variety of reasons. What I would really like to know is what type of tax breaks Amazon would get for relocating to Arlington County, both from the Commonwealth of Virginia and from the County of Arlington. I think a lot of these things happen because you give out millions of dollars of tax breaks to this very wealthy corporation that frankly doesn't need them, and take away money from our local taxpayers that could be used for schools and public safety and all sorts of other things.
Jeff, how about yourself?
Well, there's so many huge, scandalous, crazy things happening now politically that it's hard to keep up with everything. We've got the Stormy Daniels story and other women coming forward claiming that they were paid off by President Trump or they had affairs with him. Obviously, the Mueller investigation. But a story that I think could have legs that has not gotten much attention is the Attorney General of Maryland, the Attorney General of the District of Columbia have just sued the president, claiming that he has violated something called I'll butcher this, the emoluments clause of the Constitution, which bans the president from profiting from his position, and it's based on the fact that foreign leaders have stayed in his hotel in Washington and other properties.
That one hurts. Okay, well, all right, that's all we have for this week. I'm Donna Davis. Thanks for watching The Square Circle. We'll see you next week.